from around the world. Mike from around the world. How are you tonight, my brother?
Oh, God bless you this evening.
God bless you. We are so glad you're with us tonight. And I hope you saw the video of that landslide or whatever that is in Norway, where these homes literally were taking out to sea. What is that, Mike? Did you see that?
Yeah, I did see that, and it actually a couple of was it last month? And was it 2 other times in February, I believe. Something just like that was happening, but that's we have water problems, current problems. The earth is changing, and we have civilization on the land now. So when it starts to change, it's going to take some of the buildings and things with it. But if you notice, that's on the coast, and in Norway, if you look at the topology of Norway, that they've been having that inundation for a while, but the salinity of the water is different there now, and it's eating away at the coasts everywhere. We're having that same issue due to the cloud's ability to hold more moisture than normal, and so I kind of look for that to happen. Of course, the Army Corps of Engineers has been working tirelessly trying to fortify the East Coast against an episode like that, but it's just going to be unfortunate when that takes place.
What? Wait a minute. So you're saying that the same event like this could happen along the East Coast, like in Manhattan or somewhere? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. Since 1989, the Army Corps of Engineers discovered a few loose places on the East Coast and the Mississippi, and they have been working on the East Coast, up and down the East Coast for a while, trying to fortify the land there from slipping away. Concrete, huge concrete beams stuck in the ground, and lots of metal, lots of things like that. And they've been trying to fortify the East Coast so that type of landslide wouldn't happen, that natural erosion. They've been trying to halt that. Unfortunately, due to the water changing, it is becoming, for the lands, it will be somewhat acidic, and due to the cloud's ability to hold moisture, again, is causing a land saturation event, which will eventually, get the better of us, because already inland, they're noticing, especially where crops are, they're noticing that where crops are, some of the crops are being damaged, especially in South Carolina, because the ground is changing underneath the, I say about maybe 60, 70 feet below the surface of the ground is changing. And with all the empty salt mines, and by the way, the East Coast is very cavernous. These are ancient caverns running up and down the East Coast. They are filling up with water. They were once dry, but the water table, right, of saltwater intrusion has been happening, and so that saltwater is eating away at much of those caverns that were in there. There's a very special naval entry point on the East Coast. It goes all the way to Texas, and they've been having issues with that also. So, it's one of those things where the land masses are changing. I mean, exponentially, because they expected this to happen, but they didn't expect this to happen until another 250 years.
What?
In fact, yeah. Have you ever heard that term, 1,000-year storm?
Yes.
Okay, when they first started saying, this is a 1,000-year storm, I'm sure that everybody remembers that. And they kept saying it. Well, the problem was, 4 months later, they would say, well, it's another 1,000-year storm. And then some months later, another 1,000-year storm. A year later, more 1,000-year storm. So they had to do away with that term, meaning the expectancy of a storm like that would naturally hit maybe once every 1,000 years. We get them every year now. And people are they're numb to this. They can't hear it anymore. It doesn't make sense to them. In fact, if most of these events around the world were taking place about maybe 12 years ago, all of us would be looking out the window for Christ, because we would see such a drastic change from what we were used to. But we become acclimated to to all these changes, so much so they are normal to us. They don't move us like we used to, move before. We see something and you're one of the last people who really has enough energy to identify these issues and make it known to everybody, Pastor Paul. It's the truth, because a lot of other people, they're numb to it. And in fact, even the average Christian is finding it difficult to have their fire lit within themselves. And I talk about this sometimes to folks. They're having it. It's very difficult for them to keep that fire lit. Almost like an oppressive spirit is over the entire earth. Something is blanketing this entire earth, trying to suppress that fire that was lit for us, putting us in it's almost like a dormant state. And it's one of those times we really have to dig deep. But these changes that we're having, they are enormous. They are major. They are life altering. And they're going to continue to escalate. As we continue to go on, they will continue to become worse and worse and worse, which is what they're doing. They're becoming greater in magnitude. The storms are ridiculous. The jet stream, the low pressure systems that seem to form in the exact same spots every single week. This is just outrageous.
This storm that's happening, folks, this is Mike from around the world joining us tonight, and we're so glad he's with us. Wow, I've got so many questions now after you just brought up all this erosion, and we just watched the island, the landmass of Norway drift away. And then you talk about these caverns being filled with seawater that's eroding the East Coast, and when someday we could see such a thing like Manhattan, literally, or Long Island or somewhere floating away. Let me ask you a question. This storm now, we have Tropical Storm Cristobal, the third tropical storm already of the hurricane season, which is a record. It's the fastest 3 storms ever in the history again. And this thing started out as a rainstorm, Mike. It rained like 30 inches of rain in El Salvador and Guatemala. 20 people were killed. 7 are still missing. It came over the Yucatan Peninsula into the Gulf of Mexico. Started up toward it was going to go to the west, maybe West Texas side, and then did a 360-degree loop and came back and hit Mexico. Now it has bounced back out of Mexico and is on a path for New Orleans. Mike, what in the world can control a storm and cause it to react this way? Is this what you mean by storm stalling that you said a couple weeks ago? Or
Absolutely. Because if you notice, if you do a bit of weather tracking, pattern tracking, you can see that the storms are forming in the same spots over and over again. It works like this. The storms will form, low pressure systems form in various places around the world. When they build up enough energy, it starts raining in those areas. The ground cools, right? So all the storm patterns, after it cools, they change. And when it dries up again, they form right back in the same spots again. My suggestion, in fact, my caution for everybody, is to make sure that they are ready to deal with water all throughout the USA. I mean, all throughout the USA. Don't think to yourself protected areas, because the mountains will not be safe from water runoff. The rain we saw 5 inches of rain fall in 2 hours. In certain areas, this will no doubt almost be doubled by the time we reach the end of the year. So the clouds' capability to hold this moisture is unprecedented. It should wake. Meteorologists, they do their best to say what they say. They're trying to use these common terms, but it would be better if they would tell people, hey, our weather is actually changing. And it's not because of global warming. Global warming would have the opposite effect, believe it or not. It really would, concerning the rains. So, in fact, a lot of what they've been looking for, Pastor Paul, it's not happening the way they were looking for it.
No.
Back in 1972, the Navy, I believe it was, and the Army, they were preparing, or potentially they had a scenario about an ice age, because we're around that time where we have those cyclical ice ages again, and they were looking for one. Well, they calculated everything. They said, we're very close to it. And sure enough, we started having the weather changes. The issue is the radiation has gone up on the planet also. It didn't happen that way before. They have been feverishly going through ice cores and everything else to check out the atmosphere. They've been going through digs and rocks. They've been testing everything. And what we face this time is a longer durational event. Maybe it happens maybe every 10,000 years or something like that. But because of the radiation, we're about to have a bad heat problem. And what I mean is the Earth itself has consumed so much energy from radiation. It's like an overcharged battery. That's the best way I can explain it. The Earth is just like a battery, and it has overcharged. Well, when you overcharge a battery, especially lithium, right, there's a chemical response which causes a lithium battery to begin to catch on fire all by itself. If you short one, right, your best bet is to go throw it away, go throw it in the backyard, because it will continue to heat up, and in about 25 minutes it could explode, or it could certainly burst out in flames. The Earth is the same way. And so we have that heating event that's starting to take place, and it won't reverse. It's getting worse and worse and worse. This heating event is pushing up moisture out of the Earth. Is causing a massive evaporation event, pushing all the moisture up into the clouds. The clouds capture this moisture, but it should cool everything down. The problem is the Earth is emitting higher and higher gamma rays, higher and higher forms of radiation.
Right.
That is heat. And what the cloud cover is going to capture that heat. So what we can expect is almost like not a total flood to destroy the Earth, but we're going to have a bad water problem. And then, unfortunately, after that water problem, because the surface of the Earth will change during this water issue, the radiation will reach a tipping point, which will dry everything up, and we won't have water for years. And so this is what's coming about. There will be a time where water will not be available, period. I mean, it just won't be available.
So, Mike, and what's causing all this is, as you've said before, is atmospheric compression, this UV rays, cosmic rays, radiation, and that we're being inundated with these chargeable particles. The heaviness on it is driving that jet stream down. It's creating turbulent winds, changing the jet streams, changing the Gulf Stream, or killing it. And now we're seeing storms form out of nowhere that are doing weird things, and land masses drift away. And when you said that the water was, did you say saline? What'd you say that the water?
Salinity, the balance between its acidity, its saltiness, and of course other chemicals in the water is changing. So the chemistry of salt water is changing. And if it gets too bad, sea life will begin to die in large numbers. It's already happening down deep within the Earth, where superheated water is being released along with gases that try to escape throughout the water, but they're absorbed through certain forms of sea life and then later on distributed.
So when the Bible says that the Earth's going to melt with fervent heat, even the Earth itself the air is going to melt, and then the elements thereof, and I mean, this is all part of the end time. I mean, we're watching the coming apocalypse right before our very eyes. I mean,
we are. It's developing, and you know what? In a situation like this, so we as human beings, right? We evaluate everything based on time, unfortunately, which means we have a very short memory. But we have to look at this in geological time to understand how immediate the situation is we're in. I mean, immediate. I say this because it will 100% catch everybody off guard. Not one soul is really prepared for the magnitude of what's coming. I have thoroughly investigated many things, and I can tell you what, I'm not, due to the numbers that come back, nobody has ever seen a heat factor that high. Nobody has ever seen wind speeds in excess of 200 plus miles an hour. Nobody's ever seen that. So to say you know the numbers and things of that nature is fine, but to feel those effects, that's a different story. And to know this is certainly forming, because there were several models that were formed in the 60s. Pastor Paul, do you not know that the weather right now is doing exactly, I mean, year by year, exactly what those models had predicted. It's a little worse than the models are, but it puts us in a very, an unstable position. For example, Right now, I'm sure that everybody on the East Coast and people in the Midwest are beginning to notice the water factor, the changes in the water factor. The East Coast is certainly beginning to notice changes in the water table. What they may not be aware of is that because the ground is retaining that much water, it's weakening the foundation right underneath the trees, right underneath buildings. There are lots of buildings right now that are beginning to shift that have superstructures and super foundations, meaning they have very thick foundations, very well-engineered foundations to support such weight like Charlotte, North Carolina. You just can't put a building like that, building like in Charlotte, on any type of ground. You have to do a lot of engineering underneath. Well, that's eventually going to start to give way. They're going to have shifting of buildings, movements, things that just catch people off guard. And it will continue to do this, almost like we're sitting atop liquid. If we were to speed up time, it would look like the United States right now is sitting on liquid, right? Waving like that. But time is so slow, people can't notice. I'm sure, well, a lot of people are noticing with their homes because a lot of people have applied for loans to get their homes re-leveled, right? Because they're finding out they're having gaps in their floors, they're having gaps in the walls, they're noticing structural changes, and the ground is certainly shifting. Highways are cracking more than ever, certainly in 2020. Last year, 2019, they spent all that money on the highways, and they're all cracked up again. So they have to do the same thing again, which means the ground is severely shifting. Now, the ground also has a tipping point, because once two objects, right, which are pressed against each other, once they apply so much pressure, they will snap. That's how earthquakes happen, by the way, right? Strike slips and all these different things. Once that pressure releases, they snap. It's kind of like putting your finger at the edge of your desk and you push down, and if you continue to push down harder and harder and harder, it will eventually snap. Your finger pops, right? Or snapping your finger, same thing. The ground is going to do the exact same thing. These will be somewhat like earthquakes, but not really earthquakes. This is going to be from massive pressure underneath, shifting grounds, and the introduction or the absence of water that cushions everything under the earth. So, these things are happening. It's unfortunate that in this society today, if you can't prove it, nobody believes it. Just kind of like the coronavirus, nobody could prove it was going to be damaging to the U.S., so nobody paid attention. And then, unfortunately, all these people started going.
Now, Mike,
but we have that mentality. A good example of that mentality is SpaceX. They never, NASA, JPL, everybody. You know what they said to Elon Musk when he said, we're going to have a rocket land again? They said that will never happen. Nobody can do that. That's not feasible. That would take too long, this, that, and the other. They did not believe it until they had the test, and when it landed, they released all the funding the exact same day. So it goes to show you that even with the best minds, we have a hard time believing anything until we see it.
Amen.
We can't see it. We can't. People can't believe it. Hopefully, people of faith are not like that with the Lord's things, but certainly with man's things, right?
Amen.
Because I'm certainly like that with man's things. I don't believe anything of man until I see it. I can't afford to do that.
Well, we want to ask you about that. Speaking of things we can't see, but we need to believe and we need to understand. It is June 4th. You said, of course, June 5th would be an important day. Incoming clusters, this debris cloud, and I think you even called it 2 clumps they saw back on May 12th. Can you give us some intel on what's going on with this now as this debris cloud or clusters of asteroids are headed in our direction?
Right now, as we speak, there's an array being positioned. Some of it is for that purpose. And so today, the feedback will begin to come in, meaning there's a way to scan for pressure in space. There's no, well, let's put it this way. It's somewhat like pressure. It is kind of like a pressure wave, although you're missing a lot of dense areas in space. But these things, these devices are confirming the fact that it's kind of like before a storm, right? Before a storm, you may see the wind may pick up. You may see a bit of debris. You see a bunch of birds flying before the storm, right? And then all of a sudden, hail comes, the rain comes, the wind comes, all these things come. there are indications prior to large clumps headed towards us. Because I'm not concerned about the small ones, the large ones, yes. They're moving so fast. The speed is very difficult to translate because it's like this, Pastor Paul. Suppose some amateur astronomers saw a tiny, tiny speck one night, right, in their telescopes, and they looked and they said, well, what is that? The speed is such that the next night, 24 hours later, they would look at it and it would hit them, right? That's how fast things are moving out there, right? Very fast. In other words, you spot them one day, you have 24 hours, and then they're on you. It's too late. Okay. So in a lot of cases, things are spotted out there, right? And they're picked up. But by the time the data comes back for tracking everything, it's too late. They've already whizzed by the Earth. That's why you have certain objects that go by the Earth. And it's not that they're, want to kill everybody. It's that they didn't see it until it passed. Because even with the optics that we do have, we can cover quite a bit. They have, with some of the new generation optics, intelligent optics, you can see quite a bit, but still, there's always an object, there's always debris, there's always something that goes right by us. I mean, right by us, and nobody can see it. And I'm talking about close, I'm talking about between the satellites and the atmosphere. There's always something that penetrates that nobody could ever see, because you're looking at speeds that are faster than a bullet. That's what you're looking at. And when they whiz by, they're gone, right? So, with this cloud bank, I'm going to call it a cloud bank, that we're heading into, it's going to be just like that. Every single day is going to be a day of nervousness for a lot of people, because we're not going to know, when is that going to be the day? Is that going to be the hour when something happens? In fact, some of the optical arrays that they put out there and some of the networks that are out there, they're fully active right now. They're launching more and more, and they're launching more, and they have to launch more because they can't afford to have any empty spots into where we're headed. They know it's a dangerous spot. They know we're going to encounter exotic gases, so on and so forth. They know for a fact it's going to affect our atmosphere. They know these clusters are out there. It's like we're passing through an asteroid belt, but a much bigger one. That's what it's like. We're already very close, and we have another case. We're coming close to some other system out there, which will eventually, we're going to go right in the middle of that. They're going to go right in the middle of us, and that's going to be chaotic within itself. And it's unfortunate these things are absolutely in our future.
And would you agree, Mike, then that you can't really get out there in the media and try to explain this to the public? They can't see what's coming. It's not hitting every day, and people would either be paranoid and fall over dead with fear, or they would totally be in denial, or society would just come apart at the seams, and it would be literally chaos and anarchy. So this is, I think I've heard you say before, it just, look, they must be pulling their hair out. All of the different space agencies and observatories and astronomers and everyone involved in NASA and everywhere else, the European Space Agency and everywhere. Is this a worldwide effort to try to figure out how to deal with this incoming asteroid debris field, this clusters of debris that these NASA scientists on the little green file told us is coming somewhere in this? Jupiter's going to get hit, let's say next spring, late March 2021, and then we're going to encounter this thing around 2023, 2024, somewhere in there. I mean, is there an all-out attempt by the world to deal with this?
Yes, there is. You know what, to my understanding, around the years from 2022 to 2028, those are the years where those are certainty years. In other words, they're very certain about some things in those years. This year, they're trying to determine, is this one of those years where something major will take place? I mean, from space, not from anywhere else, but we're talking about from space. And it's a very difficult type of thing to do, because you're dealing with a vast amount of distance, right? For example, today, how many homes do you think were hit today by debris from space? How many?
I have no idea, Mike. I really just don't know.
Over 400. So every day We have thousands of people are killed like this. People are wounded, injured. Things happen. People are waking up with holes in their cars. This has been going on for a long time. But
yeah.
You never hear about that, do you?
No.
Though it's in the insurance forms, right? Because what happens now, you track that data is people will call in for claims and say, hey, am I covered for meteorites? Right? They call them for claims. And then you get these weird filings. Well, they have to tag those filings. So you have quite a bit of those that come in, except for the people that are killed, and it's obvious something went right through the roof, down to the floor of their basements, into the ground. In Mexico, the same thing happens all the time, specifically in one area more than others.
Why is that, Mike? Why is it that Mexico and New Mexico, Arizona, and Mexico, and Siberia over in Russia, why is it certain latitude, longitude areas of the Earth, the way it's positioned, catch more of this, or what's the story?
Those are places where the gravity is different. Gravity is different. The field lines are concentrated in these places. The U.S. found this out. NASA found this out. Missile launches. They were launching missiles from white sands, right? And they found out that if you launch at a certain angle, it's going to get pulled straight to Mexico, and so they straight to this area. So what they did was in the equipment, it's compensated for in the equipment. So you have certain launch trajectories that have to say the vectors have to be right, or it's going to be pulled or tugged over to that area. Spacecraft, satellites, everything avoids these areas. So all that is incorporated into the hardware of any device that goes into space, so it can not be sucked down into this certain area. There's something weird about these areas, something very strange. I'll tell you this: we really do think we know what reality is, but I think that we're going to find out what reality is. I wouldn't call this reality. I would call this the realm that changes based upon the decisions made in reality. But reality itself is something we have no concept for right now. So there are weird things happening, springing up all over the place, but these areas are building. Whatever forces are in these areas are building. They're concentrated forces that are building, and they're having a physical effect on everything. The animals will not go near these areas. Birds will not fly over these areas. It's just, there are no bugs in these areas. So, if you're in Mexico, right, and there are no bugs, no mosquitoes at night or anything in these areas, something is wrong. Something is very wrong.
Hey, Mike, there's also a report right now that we have a South Atlantic anomaly going on. We wanted to know what you thought about this. A man did send us an email about a shadow burn, an important solar data weather related. He said there's two giant issues brewing. We sent this email to you. We didn't know if you had a chance to look at this or not, but a solar hexagon storm is forming in the Pacific, increasing in size like the one on Saturn. The radar is showing this is in the Pacific Ocean. We have focused on concentrated beams of light in all of these rainbow phenomenons lately. Is there anything that, Mike, you could tell us about this South Atlantic anomalies, this and these weird storms and shadow beams of light?
Well, you know what? The honest answer is yes, I can. But I would sound like a lunatic. I'm just being straightforward with you. I'd sound like, well, let me give you an example. Can I give you an example?
Sure, please.
Mankind has developed lots of ways to see just about in every single light spectrum, right? Yeah. So we can see infrared, we can see ultraviolet, we can see, all sorts of spectrums. Well, they have found in certain spectrums, every human being, right, has it almost looks like a string connected to them going out into space. The same spot in space. Every single person, no matter where they go on the surface of the Earth, they're connected. There's like a big tube connected from them to somewhere out there in space. And it's always seen in a certain spectrum of light, right? So this is all the time. And it's real. Now, here's the funny part. You can see it through the optics in real time yourselves. but you won't believe it. It's like your brain has a hard time believing what you're seeing, and it's absolutely real. Well, in that same spectrum, there are other things that seem to show themselves. I'm not talking about life forms, but forces, weird forces. That to a Christian would make sense, but if you have no handle on if you haven't seen it yourself, there's no, your brain just won't readily receive this. Your mind can't hold on to this one because, again, we think we know reality, right? But we don't. But I believe when the veil is gone and when we actually see, a lot of us will have one of those, if the Lord didn't change us at that time, most of us will say, oh, how stupid was I? How stupid. For example, Pastor Paul, think of this. The human body, this is something very simple, very quick. The human body, we're walking around in a body, a biological body. But the body does not make us who we are, right?
It's true.
What makes us who we are comes from a different source. We have the body, the traits and everything, that comes from Earth. So no matter how corrupted the DNA is or anything else, that's not our identity. The body's going to die. It's going to go back to the Earth. But we experience everything here on Earth through this body. This body is like the greatest, most technical protein-based machine anybody has ever seen. But it does everything by itself. Nobody can control it. Nobody seems to complain. Because if I were to say everybody slow their heart rate down by 2%, nobody could do it, right?
No.
If I were to say, give me the feedback on your liver, what percentage are you at today? Nobody knows.
No.
So we don't even know how to operate the body. We just command it and tell it what to do, and it carries it out. But there's a thing called the soul. Now, these lights that people are connected with, these strings, these tubes, or whatever they are, I thought about one day, I said, well, what if we're not even really here? What if we're not here at all? What if we can't even be hurt? What if our souls can never be touched, right? And we're down here complaining. We're down here frightened. We're scared to death and everything else. Yet the truth is, who we really are can never be touched. Only the flesh can be hurt. And the flesh, it doesn't matter. That's what it's for, to experience everything.
Well, Mike, I think you hit it.
We can never be touched. That means all these different complaints and everything that we have here, they are baseless and
They're
useless.
temporal. They're temporal. Our soul is going to live forever. Time out, Mike. Folks, he's going to get into some stuff during the webinar. Aliens, AI, and the Antichrist. Are you serious? Here's how you better get your tickets. You better hurry, okay? Get the tickets right now. Go to my website. Brock, tell them how. Show them how. It's crazy. Aliens, AI technology, and the Antichrist. These three categories need to be explained. We're having a powerful webinar at my website, July 17th and 18th. Get your ticket now. It's time to answer some of the unexplained questions that have boggled the minds and the deception. Hollywood has confused so many, but we will answer them all. Get prepared in these last days.
Yeah, that was good.
Folks, we got Mike from around the world with us. He will be one of the speakers. Mike from around the world will be speaking during this webinar, Aliens, AI, and the Antichrist. You won't believe it. I was sitting having dinner with Heidi tonight. When my phone rang, I answered it. It was George Norrie's secretary, and I've been invited to be on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. He wants to interview me for 2 hours next week. I think it's going to be it's Thursday morning at 3 a.m. Eastern to 5 a.m. Eastern on the George Norrie Show there on Coast to Coast AM radio. So usually he has them between 1 million to 2 million listeners. I want to be ready. He wants me to tell him, why is there such locusts, frogs, weather patterns, asteroids, COVID-19, rioting? Is this the end of the world, or what? So we're going to talk about, okay? And I just want everybody ready to tune in on that. I was thinking about George, though. I was thinking, man, I'd like to ask him to be on our webinar. But I tell you, Mike around the world is going to bring some really powerful information. Mike, can you give us just a hint before we talk about the 5 ways of energy? Can you give us any kind of hint on what you might discuss in this webinar, Aliens, AI, and the Antichrist?
Well, the one thing I know I'm going to talk about is what we've already contributed to, each person, each individual. Imagine a world designed that people believed was, that's the way it is. Just like if you're born in a different country, you believe that culture is the way it is. If you're born Muslim, you believe that religion is the religion. If you're born in another nation, everything you grew up with is normal to you. So I pose a question. How would those know who lived in any specific time of massive biblical change? How would they ever know they're in that time? To them, it will be normal. Just as sure as the children in Sodom and Gomorrah didn't know that was Sodom and Gomorrah. They didn't know they were going to be in history. But we have contributed to something, and also have become blind to something. We accepted the teachings not to see. We've shut our own eyes. And what we have contributed to is, we have also approved also. I would like to show everybody how they helped a system be perfected, the very system that's rising right now, but they have contributed to, and how that matches with what the Lord told us not to do. He gave us warnings in our conduct and everything else. We have helped to fine-tune a system that is alive. Now, this system is not flesh and blood, but it's alive, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And we have helped it. We volunteered to help it. Why? Because we wanted to have fun. We wanted to relax and do all these things. But this system is very difficult to escape. It's very difficult to escape. And it fights our spirits directly, almost on a daily basis. And there is a reason people get that you can pray, that you can be full of the Holy Spirit, and all of a sudden everything comes at you. Right? Your electronic devices don't work properly. That's one notable thing people should really notice. If you are in your home and you get frustrated just a little, your equipment could start failing and everything else. That is being helped by another element that is very acquainted with all of us. But likewise, if you're praying and doing all these things, there's something that's, your electronics will do something to attempt to aggravate you and maximize in that aggravation to try and get you away from that mindset of rejoicing in the Lord. And it happens over and over again, but we're blind to it. We can't see it. We can't combat it because we're not identifying.
Well, we're dealing with spiritual warfare. I mean, we're dealing with unseen evil forces or demonic forces or foreign entities that are adversaries against us, and we're not sometimes conscious enough, spiritually discerning enough. And I think what you're saying is this is another reason why you need the gifts of the Spirit to be able to discern what you're encountering and why things are going a little haywire. I mean, we are dealing, we're not wrestling with flesh and blood, but principalities and powers and the spiritual wickedness in high places. I mean, I think it's a great point. And so you want to tie that into this, aliens, AI, and the Antichrist. I know you're going to talk about all 3 of those categories with some info.
Yeah, because there are elements of reinforcement. Things initiate unseen. But believe me, there is a physical part that has likely interacted with everybody, that has helped the unseen portion. But once a person knows about it, well, then that changes everything. It really does.
Mike,
they're better equipped.
Amen. Mike, also, just real quick, guys, tomorrow night there's going to be a full strawberry moon, okay? And it's tonight, actually, and tomorrow night. So we have a full moon tonight and tomorrow night. It's not a blood moon. It's not a red moon. It's a strawberry moon. That's called that because it is strawberry season. It's the first full moon of June. It's always called the strawberry moon. It's tonight and tomorrow night, so keep an eye on that. But don't forget, we are going to have a lunar eclipse, a blood moon, over all of America on the 4th of July. And it actually starts at 11:07 Eastern Standard Time just before the midnight hour, and it will last for about 3 hours. It will carry us into over into midnight, and is a blood moon. It's one of the things that I've been talking about, and how prophetic is this blood moon over America with everything that's going on our nation's 4th of July. Mike, we did get one of our Navy veterans out of prison. The president was able to release Michael White after over 600 days. And it was a prison swap with one of their scientists. Any comments you have on that?
Yeah, that was a good move there. I can, first of all, that is excellent, and I can only imagine the grief of being held there in the first place. If anybody ever had experience being held against their will in a place they're not familiar with, it is something else. But there's still more people over there. Possibly, maybe, the things are in the works for the rest of them. So, that's a good move. That's a very good move. And I understand it's somewhat overshadowed by some of these protests, and that's a conversation that should have been had a long time ago. But that's still a good move. That's a good move.
Mike,
you know what?
Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
We've got. That's one thing that really we don't think about a lot. There's so many U.S. soldiers, right, detained in other nations. I think it will be shocking for anybody to find out just how many are held in these other places for whatever the case is. But it's shocking to know that with all what goes on, right, we're not really that sensitive to people being held like that. Not everybody is. It's not one of those public issues that bothers. You know what? In fact, they made it known that people were held overseas. Last year, remember, nobody moved. There was no feedback on the news. They gave the story, and it's almost like nobody cared. They said, "Okay, next subject." It's a sad thing, but I take it to heart, because I put my life on the line for this country, right? And if somebody puts their life on the line for the country, I also know what it's like to be spit on when you come back after combat. For no one to like what you did, because they don't understand what you did, right? I know what that's like, and I know what it's like to be spit on and do it anyway, regardless if they spit on you or not, because you're doing it for a different cause and to be appreciated by anybody. You're doing it for real, and that makes a difference. Well, those guys held overseas, a lot of them, they do what they do for real. And when they get held like that, they fight with everything that they are, just to continue to make it. Yet, as most of the citizens over here, they don't know about them. It's not something that people, that excites anybody, that bothers too many folks, or it's just unfortunate. And I think, to a large degree in this nation, it's time for us to really start to really think again. What we need to start calling if we're going to call ourselves Americans, then do that, because to call yourself an American means you have American values. And those values are not to leave everybody in the dust and to go on with the next, the next best cell phone. Everybody gets excited about a cell phone, but they won't lift a finger for some of these individuals called overseas. That's very unfortunate. And Christians should never have that heart. We should be the first ones to know what it's like to be pushed to the side. We should be there, because to come to Christ, all of us can almost admit, in order for us to come to Christ, we had to be pushed into a corner first. We had to be stripped of many things in preparation to that. Or normally people don't naturally call out for Christ when things are going well. We have examples of that in the world. But things did not go well for us, and we began to identify the darkness, that we didn't work well in the darkness. We don't belong in that place. And but we cried out, and the Lord answered. Well, doesn't he ask of us to do the same thing for our fellow man?
He does. Mike, some other questions real quick before we get out of time. What about China right now? There's been, the anniversary of Tiananmen Square, a proclamation was made that it's against the law now to recite the Hong Kong, or to sing the Hong Kong national anthem, or to wave the Hong Kong flag, that they must submit to communist regime. Yet there was a declaration of independence from China. People in China are declaring their independence from communist China today. This is just breaking in the last 2 to 3 hours. What is going on over there?
The protests are coming back. You remember they had those protests, and then that virus shut the protests down. The protests are coming back. That's unfinished business. The people over there are tired of being ruled with an iron fist. The unfortunate part is they're outnumbered by China. Have you checked the last troop count? It's estimated their troop count in China, as far as the soldiers are concerned. But the new islands that were formed that have technology on there that is going to give us a headache very soon. It's just they're overflowing with soldiers, and most of their people who are not soldiers, they're not. They're kept in the dark about a great many things, but China doesn't care. China's going to force their culture, just like they have been. They're going to continue to resist every single outsider's advice in changing the core of that place. That's really what we're fighting. Like right now, Iran. You don't hear about Iran, do you? But you're about to. You don't hear about Kim Jong-un, but you're about to. Because these guys, just like these folks in the United States, Pastor Paul, are the people who have, they're up to their head with aggravation. So are these other nations, and it's starting to boil over. There are recent movements that express that point. Very dangerous movements. Nevertheless, it happened. I know it's gonna have some consequences. I just hope everybody is ready for the consequences. And all this at a time when I know tomorrow at around. I believe it's 5:15. Physical issues may start happening to people everywhere because of an inbound pulse. That's at 5:15 p.m.
Whoa, wait a minute. 5:15 p.m. Eastern. 5:15 p.m. Eastern. We're getting ready to get hit with some kind of inbound pulse, wave of energy. Now,
here's what I personally want to do, Pastor Paul. I want to tie in some of this radiation with the physical attributes of people. So I'm looking for folks who experience headaches around that time tomorrow. Somewhere around that time, maybe an hour before, hour after, or during that time. But I want to know who's not feeling quite right around that time, because we certainly have a pulse coming through. What the effects of this pulse is, I have no idea. The Earth is overcharged. It could trigger things in the sun. It could trigger things in the Earth. We're going to find out tomorrow.
What's the source of the pulse? Is it one of the waves of energy?
It is part of the same exact thing that's been smacking us for some years now, and they're going to, since August 17th of 2015-16, they're going to keep coming through like this. Is more radiation. So tomorrow at 5:15 p.m. I am curious to see the physical effects on people, because I suspect something, Pastor Paul. I know that the magnetosphere is normally affected by these things. It not only does it direct high-speed particles, but the magnetosphere affects the way the way a person's emotions are. In other words, if we had a certain pattern of magnetic influence around the Earth, people would become highly irritated. I mean, highly irritated all at one time, especially those who rely upon their emotions to navigate their day. So with that aggravation, with what's going on in the world, if our magnetosphere is highly affected by this stuff tomorrow, there could be quite a few incidences out there in the world.
Here's a quick report, Mike. This just came out. Popular Mechanics put this out, and here's what it says. The Earth's magnetic field is shaking things up once again. Now, Heidi gave me this information this morning. Sloshing liquid iron in the Earth's outer core, which lies roughly 1,900 miles below us, generates our planet's protective magnetic field. It guards against solar winds that ferry damaging charged particles. It also guides the navigation systems that direct everything from smartphones to satellites. In recent decades, our magnetic field has been changing. We know, for instance, that the magnetic North Pole has been shifting at a record speed in recent years. But now scientists are using the European Space Agency with swarm satellites are monitoring the weakening of the Earth's magnetic field in a region that stretches from Africa to South America. They dub it the South Atlantic Anomaly. So you're saying tomorrow, though, the Earth is going to get hit with a pulse, a wave of energy on June 5th at 5:15 p.m. Are we going to feel it here in the United States?
We could. I'm unsure as to what it can do, but that's only part of the tip of the iceberg tomorrow. That's 5:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so everybody gets the right time zone, because I'm very curious.
So what else? What else tomorrow? What else tomorrow?
Well, there's still, but see, we have this inbound, we have debris issues all over the place, Pastor Paul, and we still have inbounds, and these inbounds will begin to increase as far as their fireballs that enter into the atmosphere, which, people will be able to see these fireballs as they intensify in number, because they'll be super bright. It'll be hard to miss them. But we're going to have an increase of these things. It'll be because they come in clumps. Maybe 1 week we see a bunch of fireballs, maybe it relaxes the next week, and then the week after that we see a bunch more, until it gets to the point we are entertaining fireballs almost on a daily basis. I know it seems unreal now, but when the damage begins, when the fires begin, when all all of what goes with that begins, it'll be unmistakable. The excuses will run out. I think that people are at the point right now, they're not interested in excuses, which is causing a bigger problem, because, they foresaw this coming. I can tell you that right now, which is why our communications are being handed over. Because they have to control the flow of information. I believe that prior to these riots, prior to this death of this individual, there were some reports that came out concerning 5G, concerning certain laws that would control communication, concerning the regulation of social media. I believe we discussed that. But I want you to look at these events. All that came out prior to this stuff happening, and then all of a sudden this happens. Well, how do these protests, how are they organized, folks? They're organized through social media. But if social media has the slightest bit of governance in it, and it's already been shaken up quite a bit, then they can tamper with communication organization, and these spontaneous responses like this won't work. But I want people to take note of something. That happened before the riots ever took place. That happened before this gentleman was killed. Not after this happened before. We're dealing with something here that coordinates on a global basis. And if you're one of those people that's just, it's just coincidence. Well, we've had an entire year full of coincidences. How many more do we need before we finally determine we're dealing with something here that is not playing around with us, and something is setting up and organizing everything against, it's happening, it's not slowing down, it's speeding up. And so our best defense, we know it's the blood. I'm not worried about any of the effects from this stuff. I really am not. I don't care about getting wounded, hurt, or any of those things, because I know that nothing will ever happen to me that I cannot handle, because the Lord said he will not place upon you that beyond which you can bear. So I can handle everything that comes my way. So I need not complain, but I sure wish people would open their eyes to see there's a spiritual coordination event taking place right now. It is directly related to some of the topics of the beast, Pastor Paul, that you speak about. Yep. This system is, if you could see it in the way that I see it, to me, it's like towers are rising up all over the place, and it's taking control and power. Every place we lose ourselves, this thing is rising. It's doing what it wants to do.
Mike, you're exactly right. Today I did a show today, and one of the things I wanted to bring out, I think it was yesterday, that in Revelation chapter 9, it talks about the smoke of the furnace, Abaddon, Apollyon, rising up, and all these, what looked like to John 2,000 years ago, what looked like scorpions with stingers in their tails and their helmets in their heads, and they were a mass locusts, but they were metal. He's seen them, they were metal, they had iron, and they're rising up out of Babylon. And the Lord spoke to me over in the Euphrates River. If you read the scripture, it says it comes out of the Euphrates River area and out of the Babylon area. And the Lord spoke to me and said, do you remember what President Barack Obama said when he said that ISIS was a JV team? He was right. That ISIS was just men, flesh and blood men running around chopping off Christians' heads and murdering people. But compared to what was getting ready to be unleashed from Babylon, that was the JV team. And this hit me hard, Mike. Am I making sense here?
You're on the money.
And so there's more to this story, and I know Mike knows more on this, but it just came to me, and the Lord said to me, you need to tell people they haven't seen nothing yet what's going to be released from the bowels of this earth and what man is conjuring up and doing along with the principality and the beast kingdom. Mike, before we let you go, can you come back next Thursday night, June 11th? We need you to come back and tell us more about this pulse that's going to hit us tomorrow night.
I will be here, Pastor Paul. In fact, that is the time of a few tools are going to be launched for our website. I've been holding back quite a bit until we hit the right season. We're in the right season now, so I can go ahead and do my thing. But yeah, we're going to be we're really hitting some points of instability, and so we're going to have much to discuss next week.
So, all right, okay, then you can make that announcement next week, and we look forward to hearing what that is. Guys, tomorrow night at 5:15 p.m. Eastern, then and before, Mike's saying, pay attention to what's going on, and let him know. We'll even ask you guys next Thursday night if you felt the headaches or what is it you felt and what all is going on. As Mike said, we don't even know what all we're going to encounter. This is another wave of energy that's apparently going to hit us on June 5th at 5:15 p.m. Eastern time. And Mike has been dead on the last two times. So it's not him. Well, it is him. It's the information he's getting, and he's sharing it with us the best he can. Mike, I want to thank you so much for coming on and being with us tonight. It was a pleasure to get this info and giving us this heads up and this update.
Well, God bless you, Pastor Paul. It's always an honor.
All right. God bless. Lord willing, we will see you next Thursday night. God bless.